is the fourth in a series of talks. We have another one next week. My friend Joanna, who is a professional poker player, is going to be talking about cards. And as you can see, there is a full house in the painting up there by Natalie Asencios. But what I wanted to do, because I've been thinking about the centennial for a number of years, since my friends and I started the Dorothy Parker Society 20 years ago, thinking about 2019, I wanted to do a talk about the roundtable members who are not in the painting. Because a couple of things, for those of you that are roundtable fans, the popular conception of the roundtable has really been established by Al Hirschfeld, who did the drawing of the roundtable. But that was in 1950 that he did that for a magazine, so that's 20 years after the group started. And many of them had already been deceased, and he was not here during that time. He met some of them because he was working in the 20s, of course. And this painting by Natalie Asencios from 2002, which debuted for the centennial of the hotel, I was here for the unveiling. It's the same 11 members. But the thing to know is there's 30 roundtable members. Okay, there's 30. And even though there's a lot of women that are not in the painting, there's also a lot of famous men too. People like Herman Mankiewicz, who wrote Citizen Kane, Deems Taylor, who wrote the first great American opera with Edna St. Vincent Millay. One of my favorites is Frank Sullivan, who wrote for the New Yorker for 50 years. He's not in the painting. But, you know, you have Dorothy Parker and Edna Ferber, but there's 7 women who aren't in the painting. So that's 1/3 of the roundtable members were women. They're not represented, and that's what I wanted to talk about tonight. So a couple of things. The roots of the roundtable started here 100 years ago, this past month, when Alexander Wolcott, the guy in the green, came back from France. So because this is the centennial of World War I, the end of the war, that was the impetus for starting the roundtable. Okay? So when he came back here, 2 publicists, Murdoch Pemberton and John Peter Toohey, 2 men who also aren't in the painting, brought Wolcott here to lunch to get their new show in the Hippodrome Theater into the New York Times. Wolcott had just returned from France the previous week. They had no luck getting the story into the Times, even though it was played by Eugene O'Neill of all people. But they did get 2 hours of war stories from Wolcott. When I was in the trenches with the boys, when I was, you know, in the theater of war. And so that gave me the idea of having a welcome back to luncheon or roast for Wolcott. So they went back to Mr. Brown, sent out invitations to writers, actors, actresses, publicists, Broadway folks, critics, columnists, and they met here in the Oak Room in the first week of June 1919. And they had a fantastic time. When they went out that door, someone said, why don't we do this again? So they came back the next day, and the next day, and the next day. So for the next 7-8 years, 6 days a week, that group met here in the hotel. When Frank Case, the general manager, whose picture's on the wall over there, saw how famous they were, he moved them out of the Oak Room to this room and gave them a big round table. Not this table. This table's only from 1998. The original round table, you could fit 16 people around the board. And we have, what, 10 here? You can fit a lot more. Is that 10? 8. Math was never my strong suit, that's why I'm a writer. So we have 8 here, so imagine a table, you have 16 people sitting around the table. Okay? So some of the others that were here were women. Okay? So I'm not going to do this in alphabetical order or anything like that, so I'm just going to tell you some of my research, which went into this book, which is The Algonquin Round Table, New York, which my publisher, Lyons Press, great job, not in print. You can download it as a PDF, but it's coming out in paperback in a few months, but there's no hardcovers around. Yeah, they did a great job with that, so I hope my editor's watching. First of all, let's talk about Marlo Gilmore. So Marlo Gilmore is called the baby of the Round Table. She was born in London in May 1897. So she had just turned 22 when she joined the Round Table, and she was the youngest of the group. She was a 3rd-generation actor. Her parents were actors, her grandparents were actors. So that's why she was born in London, because her parents were on tour in London. And her younger sister Ruth was born in London as well, too. So this is from The Straw in 1921, which was written by Eugene O'Neill. She was in all the early Eugene O'Neill shows. Okay? So she didn't get back to New York until she was about 5 or so. Okay? And her whole life she just wanted to be on the stage like her parents. And her father was very well known. Her father was Frank Gillmore, who was one of the 4 or 5 men who started Actors Equity Association around 1913. We're coming up on the centennial actor strike next month. The 1919 actor strike, which went from August to September 1919, which got a lot of benefits and really solidified what equity is about. But Margalo was one of the first 10 members of Equity to get an equity card. And her career spanned silent pictures as a teenager all the way up until live TV. Some of you might remember the Peter Pan on CBS, the live production in the 1950s. She was Mrs. Darling. So her career, like a lot of roundtables, spanned many eras of pop culture. Now, another thing about the research is you never want to trust anything on the internet. Everybody knows that, right? So the internet said that she was buried in Alabama. Like, why the hell would Margaret Gilmore be buried in Alabama? That made no sense. So there was nothing in her obituary about when she died. She was the last roundtable to pass away. She died in 1986. So she was the last living roundtable member. So I looked at where her dad was buried, because her dad was more famous than she was. And so I saw he's interred in Kensico in Westchester County. A lot of actors, a lot of vaudevillians are buried up there. So I went up to visit Dad. Big, big gravestone. Carved on it is the Actors Equity Association logo. Mom, Dad, and Margalo. So she's buried with her parents and her husband right there in Kensico. So it's really nice to be able to find them. My next favorite person is Neysa McMein. Neysa McMein. Maybe some of you recognize the name. I know some of you art collectors, maybe. So she was the #1 magazine illustrator of the teens and 20s. She was up there with J.C. Leyendecker and people like Rockwell. She was doing a lot of magazine covers for people like McCall's and advertising art, Colby, Palmolive. Because back then you weren't selling stuff with photography, you were selling with illustrations. And she was a little bit older than the group. So she was 31. So she was born in Queens, Illinois in 1888. So she was a little bit older. Most of the roundtable members were in their late 20s, early 30s, and she was on the older side for that. She was a suffragette. She fought for women's rights. She campaigned for voting. But she didn't really come to the hotel very much. She had a salon at 57 West 57th Street, which is right on 57th and 6th. And so the roundtable members would have lunch here, go back to their offices and work, and then go to Neysa's house, to her studio, while she was standing in front of a canvas painting. She always wore a beautiful dress with pearls and a smock, and then she'd have a model that she'd be illustrating for a magazine cover. And the party would continue around the room. And people like Cole Porter, George Gershwin on the piano, and the roundtable members would gather around her. Another thing about Neysa, she really popularized a lot of games that we see today. Scavenger hunts, she invented that. Charades, she popularized that. And she had a column where she would go with Dorothy Parker. And Dorothy Parker, they were in the same building on 57th Street. So Dorothy would interview Ethel Barrymore while Neysa was painting her, and then that would run as like a newspaper piece. My next person, Peggy Leach. Peggy Leach. Margaret Leach, born in Newburgh, New York, went to Vassar College, yay Vassar. Okay. So Peggy Leach has a lot going on for her. So she was 25 when the roundtable started. She was born in November 1893. She came to New York after graduating from Vassar. She went to work for Condé Nast for the magazines that weren't Vogue and Vanity Fair. So she worked on the other magazines. She wrote novels on the side. Okay. Then when she was approaching 30, she married Ralph Pulitzer. So Pulitzer's father was Joseph Pulitzer, who was a big deal from the New York world. So she married into some money. It was his second marriage. They had 2 children. One passed away as a baby. Her other daughter lived for a number of years. So after her husband passed away, she turned to serious historical writing. In serious social life, she raised a lot of money for a lot of causes. And she was really the first person to read any Kaufman play. So Kaufman wrote 44 scripts. She was always the first reader, so he really trusted these skills. And she wrote a play with Peggy Leach, and it had the bad luck to open the same week as a George S. Kaufman show, and folded after a couple of days. Yeah, it didn't go very well.
Have you read it?
Yeah, it's not very good. All right. Another actress is Peggy Wood. Anybody heard of Peggy Wood? All right, so Peggy Wood fans. If she's known for anything today, is she was the Mother Abbess in The Sound of Music in 1965. Okay. She was in I Remember Mama too. So Peggy Wood was born in Bed-Stuy, so she's a Brooklyn girl. Her father was a magazine writer. So her father wrote for many, many magazines and newspapers. And she inherited that skill. Started acting as a teenager on Broadway before World War I. But she also took a lot of notes. So she wrote first-person accounts of being on the stage, of traveling with John Drew, of traveling around Broadway, around the country. Okay? So she was a big star when she came to the Round Table. She was never really a leading woman. She was usually like the secondary or third role. She acted in films with Will Rogers. She went from silent pictures to talking pictures. When the Round Table started, she was 27, so that's a little bit on the older side for the group that was meeting here. But a couple of things that happened to Peggy is she met her husband here, John Weaver. Now, Johnny V.A. Weaver is not in the painting as well. He went to Hamilton College, and Wolcott went to Hamilton, so he loved anyone from Hamilton College. When Johnny Weaver got out of World War I, he came to New York at the invitation of H.L. Mencken. Weaver was a poet who wrote in Americanese, which was slang. They called him the slang poet. And he wrote a poem about he would never fall in love. So he came here, and Peggy Wood was very well read and said, "You're not going to fall in love?" So they had a secret relationship. Both of them were married in the Bahamas. But she didn't really, I don't know if she knew it or not, it's hard to say, but he had tuberculosis. So he passed away a few years after they were married, out west. So he was in a tuberculosis hospital. She was traveling. She always opened all Noel Coward's shows. So she was in all the Noel Coward shows. So John Weaver had written a famous poem called "When I'm All Through." And what it was about was, when he died, he wanted his ashes spread in 4 different places. On the ocean, in a field, in the air, and on a city street. It was a very famous poem in the 20s. So when he died, all reporters said to Peggy Wood, "What are you going to do with the ashes?" And she honored that request. She didn't say where she did it, but she did it. So, another thing about Peggy, she died in Connecticut in 1978, I think it was, in an old folks home. And so they found hundreds and hundreds of books in her possession. They just dumped them at the local library. They were all first edition signed by Hemingway, Fitzgerald, Bacon, huge collection. She knew everybody. All right. This is definitely the saddest of all the stories. This is Ruth Hale. Ever heard of Ruth Hale?
Yeah.
Feminist? Well, she was the proto-feminist. So Ruth Hale had a very, very interesting life. And she was also married to one of the Round Table members, Heywood Broun. And a lot of people think that she ghost wrote a lot of Broun's columns. You know, Broun was a very, very well-known columnist, first for the Tribune and then for the New York World. So Ruth Hale was 32. She was born in Rogersville, Tennessee, college educated. She graduated from what is today Drexel University in Philly. Okay? One of the first things she wanted to do when she came to New York was to lose that southern accent. She worked very, very hard to not sound like she was from the South. But she and Jane Grant and other women of the Round Table and their friends, like Michael Strange, everybody know who Michael Strange is? Michael Strange was married to John Barrymore. So Michael Strange was the pen name of, what was her real name? Dolores? No, that's another wife. Anyway, they started the Lucy Stone League. The Lucy Stone League was an organization for women to maintain their maiden name after marriage, because back then you had to change your name. They were not going to recognize you in the government if you were going to maintain your maiden name. So Ruth, Jane Grant, and others wanted to get passports issued in their maiden name, not their married name. And so they fought the State Department for that. So when she finally got a passport, it was issued as Ruth Hale, otherwise known as Mrs. Heywood Broun. So she was a writer, she was a critic, she was a columnist. She went to France with Broun. When Broun was sent to France to cover World War I for the New York Tribune, she went over as a writer to cover it for the Chicago Tribune. While she was there, she became pregnant with her one and only son, Heywood Hale Broun, who became a famous sportscaster in the 1960s. And so they came back to New York. Now, the funny thing about them is they lived in a brownstone on West 85th Street. The bottom floor was Bruns, the second floor was Ruth's, and the top floor was Woody's. So they maintained kind of a separate lifestyle, just like the Kaufmans did. Then she bought a house in Stamford, Connecticut, where they retired to. Ultimately, she died, but she quit eating, and so she had a very, very sad end to her life. And when her remains were sent back to Tennessee, her mother put on her gravestone, Ruth Hale, wife of Haverford. Kind of a sad thing. And finally, my favorite person. My favorite person. Any writers or playwrights here, movie producers? This is the person to write a movie about. Jane Grant. Jeanette Cole Grant. Jeanette Cole Grant, who co-founded The New Yorker with Harold Ross. Now, if you had every book written about The New Yorker or by New Yorker writers, and trust me, I do, it would take up this much space on your bookshelf. There is this much space written about Jane Grant. Okay? Grant had a fascinating, fascinating life. She was born in Joplin, Missouri. When as a kid, her mother died very young. So she was raised by her husband's people in Girard, Kansas. And in Kansas, at the turn of the century, you had two choices as a woman, wife or teacher. And she didn't want either one of those. But Jane was blessed with a beautiful singing voice. So as a teenager, she convinced her father to let her come to New York to train as a singer using some of her money, the money from her late mother's estate. So her dad cut a deal with her. I think she was like 17 or 18 at the time, where she could come to New York for 1 year to study singing, then she would go back to Girard, Kansas to be the local music teacher. Great. She comes out here by herself, studies voice for a year, and you know what she says? I'm not going back to Kansas. So she moves into a place called the Three Arts Club, which is on West 85th Street. It was for women who are singers, dancers, and actresses, to keep the men out. So it's a women's only hotel, residence hotel, and that's where Jane is living. And so she's taken under the wing by a society woman who says, you know, Jane, this singing career probably is going to take off. You probably should go to school. So she went to business school to learn a trade, went into publishing. Publishing led to a job at the New York Times, where she worked for the legendary imaginator Carl Van Atta. And Van Atta said, there's no women reporters. There's no women in the city room. Okay? So he put her to work in the society department. So she was answering the phones, writing up things like weddings and announcements, engagements, and covering hotels. But you know what? Jane Grant was the first female reporter on the New York Times. Okay. When World War I starts in 1914, the U.S. got into it in 1917, she says to the New York Times, I want to go to France and be a correspondent. And it reminds her that she wears a dress. So she resigns her position, joins the YMCA. That's the picture that she's wearing in her YMCA uniform. Because remember, she can sing. So she goes to France, where she entertains the troops, and while she's in France, she meets up with a old friend, Alexander Wolcott. And Wolcott, who's on Stars and Stripes with Harold Ross, says, I want you to meet my friend Harold Ross. That's how they met in France. Okay? When the war's over, Ross says, I'm going back to California, and she said, I'm going back to New York because I have a job waiting for me at the Times. So Ross follows Grant back to New York. She goes back to her job at the Times. They're wed in 1920. They live on his salary, bank curs, because they have an idea of launching a magazine. So in 1924, they start showing a mock-up of the future New Yorker around New York City. And everybody thinks it's going to be a joke because they don't really have a lot of respect for Ross, but they know that Jane is the brains of the operation. Jane Grant lines up the first investor, Rolf Fleischmann from Fleischmann's Yeast, the German-Jewish baking fortune. Jane lines up some of the first writers, like her friend Janet Flanner, who wrote for the magazine for 50 years. So Ross says in 1940, without Jane Grant, there would be no New Yorker. Okay? They divorced? Yes. So they divorced in 1927, just 2 years after the magazine started, because, as he said, he was married to his bitch mistress, which was the magazine. But she didn't want alimony. She wanted stock, which was virtually worthless at the time, but ultimately was very, very valuable. So, you know, they say there's no second acts, but there was. So she went back to the Times. She was the first woman, first reporter, man or woman, to go to Nazi Germany from an American newspaper, Communist China. She starts a whole second career with her second husband. They moved to Connecticut, buy a farm in Litchfield County, where seed businesses, they started a seed business, because gardening was a new thing, a big thing during World War II, and that becomes White Flower Farm. If you've ever heard of White Flower Farm, the seed business, she and her husband started that. And her legacy is a rhododendron, a Jane Grant rhododendron. Blooms nice, big, and red. But the sad thing is, when she died in 1974, guess what page her obituary was on? Now remember, co-founder of the New Yorker, first woman reporter of the New York Times. When I worked at the New York Times, I asked women, you ever heard of Jane Grant? And no, I knew who she was. Her obituary is on page 44.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So she left all of her money, all of her papers to the University of Oregon to start women's studies school, which is still around today. So those are my 7 women. So I'm going to give these to you guys. Can you put this in front of the painting, please?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. So we're going to put this in front of the painting. Do you have any questions? We'll do a quick Q&A. Any questions?
How old was Walcott?
Wolcott? Wolcott was around 32, 33 maybe. He wasn't that old.
He's always said that was Clifton Way.
No, he didn't live very long. He died when he was not even 60 during World War II. Another question back there?
I have it. Where are we putting these?
Put them in front of the painting. You gotta line them up in front of the painting.
The ladies that weren't in the painting.
That's the picture we want to get. Yeah, line up in the painting. Another question over here? Centennial Round Table to remember the forgotten 7 women of the Vicious Circle. So thanks everybody.
Thank you.